Vermodden, good morning everyone. Is that clap because I managed to get up this morning after all that dancing last night? So you're very, very welcome to, I suppose, day 3, but day 4 really, of the Walk21 Ireland Conference. And I'm delighted that so many of you have managed to get up this morning after all the fun we had last night. Really hope you had an enjoyable evening and that you didn't get too wet coming in this morning. What you've experienced this morning is what we call wet rain. You know, in Ireland we have a number of different types of rain. You know, we say it rains a lot. Most of the time it's fine. Today you've experienced wet rain. So this morning's session is today's session. Actually, the whole day is being sponsored by it's been supported by, alongside our key sponsors, by Fingal County Council, which is one of our Dublin local authorities. TU Dublin have campuses on 3 of the 4 local authorities in the Dublin area. And in Fingal in particular, they have a great emphasis on their active travel projects. Pedestrian projects. They had the first school street, which you heard about the other day, a street closed off outside a school, and that's where we heard about those huge decrease in air pollution outside the schools as a relation to that project. And they have a particular interest in looking at gender and looking at accessibility and opportunities for all ages. So they were a very fitting supporter for today, where we're going to have our World Café plenary on walking and safety, security and sustainability, and how we can make walking safer, more secure and sustainable to help deliver on the SDG commitments by 2030. Okay, so I'll give a little bit more information on things in a few minutes. The voice is holding up. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. We'll get through this. So I'd like to invite up Minister Feighan. Sorry, I'll use your official name. Who's our Minister for State in the Department of Health with responsibility for public health and the National Drug Strategy. You're very welcome, Frank.
Thanks very much, Lorraine. And I'm called Frankie and Frank, but in politics I've been called a lot worse, I can tell you, that's for sure. I'm sure they don't mean it. Good morning, everybody. And I think, Lorraine, you alluded to a wet Dublin. Dublin is very dry compared to where I come from. I come from Sligo in the west coast, and it rains all the time. Anything comes in off the Atlantic, and in Sligo we have a big mountain overlooking Sligo. It's known as Ben Bulben. And the joke is, if you can't see Ben Bulben, it's raining. And if you can see Ben Bulben, it's about to rain. So I'm delighted to join you all today on day 4 of the 22nd Walk21 Conference. And I want to say right from the start that myself and my colleagues in government and in the Department of Health are very happy that Ireland is hosting the conference this year. And I want to thank the Walk21 community for giving us this great opportunity. And one of the great features about our country is the great opportunities for walking you can find everywhere. You are never very far from a green space in Ireland, and this is borne out by the fact that 91% of visitors to Ireland indicate that our landscape and scenery are their main reasons for coming here. And in recent years we have seen great investment and work taking place in the development of greenways around the country. In fact, earlier this year I was pleased to learn that our Royal Canal Greenway has recently won an award from a Dutch walking and cycling fair, beating off competition from Germany, Belgium and the Netherlands. In another life I used to always fly to Eindhoven or between Belgium, the Netherlands and Germany, and I cycled quite a lot. And I used to always say, God, wouldn't it be great if we did this in Ireland? And now we're getting awards from the Netherlands, Germany and Belgium, so we've maybe come a bit of the way. My apologies, by the way, to anyone from those countries who may be here today, but we did take a few prizes off you, so that's good. I understand that this is my 3rd time here now. I was here a few months ago launching this seminar, but also I met you all on a Tuesday night in the Mansion House. I was supposed to go home at 9 o'clock, but the fun was so good, I decided to stay another hour or two. Will somebody explain to my wife, please, why I was late? But thank you very much. All of this makes Ireland a perfect place to host this year's Walk21 conference. I want to take this opportunity to thank TU Dublin for their leadership in hosting the conference. And it's very fitting that we're here today in the great campus with its magnificent grounds, which provide such great opportunities for walking, running and cycling, both for the students and those in the wider community around the campus. One of my most important areas of responsibility as Minister of Public Health and Wellbeing is promoting the importance of physical activity in health. And in 2016, my department published a major policy initiative in this area. The National Physical Activity Plan, for short, it's NPAP for short, contains 60 actions designed to increase the number of people taking part in physical activity across the population. And promotion of walking is a key component of this plan. Safety is, of course, a key concern for all our activities, and I note that the theme of this morning's session is pedestrian safety. My colleague Eamon Ryan, the Minister of Transport, has prioritised this in recent years with very significant investment in the construction of walking and cycling infrastructure. This includes partnering with our colleagues in the Department of Education to deliver a programme called Safe Routes to School, which aims to accelerate the delivery of safe walking, cycling and scooting infrastructure on key access routes to schools, and in this way can ensure that the next generation adopts the active transport habit. And I want to mention at this point that most of our valued partners in this area, Get Ireland Walking, is our national initiative to maximise the number of people in Ireland, and I want to extend thanks to the programme manager Jason King and his colleagues, Murrell McMahon from Mountaineering Ireland and Louise Burke and our colleagues in Sport Ireland, all of whom are doing such a great work in promoting the walking agenda in Ireland and who have also played key roles in bringing Walk21 to Ireland. I want to thank Professor Fitzpatrick, Dr. Meany, Vice President for Sustainability Jennifer Boyer, Dr. Darcy and colleagues in TU Dublin, and Jim Walker and Brown Thornton from Walk21 for their hard work and support in bringing the conference to Dublin. Finally, it is a great honour to be here, and you've come from all corners of the globe, and I understand that you've learned to dance, do a bit of Irish dancing as well, so it's great to see, and I look forward to meeting you again, and I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Minister. And we mentioned it yesterday, but I think it's important for us to emphasise that the three ministers that you met over the last number of days are three ministers from our supporting departments in government, actually come from three different political parties. And, you know, to have that cohesive approach and that cohesive support from across the political spectrum has been, it's a big thing for us, and that you mightn't realise that it's been really brilliant to get that support, and, you know, to see the government's investment in physical activity, as you say, through the National Physical Activity Plan, National Obesity Strategy, Healthy Ireland Strategy, the Towns First policy, the Sustainable Mobility Plan, the Greenway Strategy. I think I counted, when I was writing the business case for bringing the conference here, I think I counted over 30 different government policies for which this event was relevant to. And, you know, and I didn't even realise it was so much until I actually was on the website going through the policies going tick, 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 tick. You know, so it's been really brilliant having your support, and thank you very, very, very much. So, next up. Ooh. I apologise for the squeaks. It's my great pleasure to introduce Holger Dalkman, I hope I did that justice, who's a global expert, or he's from Sustain 2030, and he's a global expert for over 25 years in leadership positions at world-renowned institutes such as the World Resource Institute, the Transport Research Laboratory, or TRL as many of us would know it. He's a co-founder of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Low-Carbon Transport and has worked in and with over 40 countries globally. He's also, for those transport planners and for anybody who is familiar with the Irish Climate Action Plan transport section, he's Mr. Avoid, Shift and Improve. You're very welcome, Holger.
Thanks, Lorraine, and welcome. And thanks. That's great. We had fantastic days, at least I was actually surprised that the minister said 91% is to just come for the landscape. I would say is really is to come for the people here. So you have been amazing. So thanks a lot. So I have the honor to facilitate this almost last session. But we have actually 3 elements. So we will talk about the decade to change. So steps to deliver the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. So that is the biggest agenda. But the good thing is with these 3 sessions we can't fail. We have excellent speakers, which I will introduce in a minute. But there is you, the community, and the experts are in fact in the heart of that. So we will also give you also the responsibility also to make those also like a successful session, and I will talk more about also the World Café in a minute. Let's talk a little bit about the SDGs and setting a little bit the scene. Lake Sagaris, where's Lake? So she did a wonderful job at the beginning of the conference, setting us to the scene, saying, well, the SDGs are so important. We have road safety, and we have a target which we desperately, absolutely failed. So in 2020, also, we had the target also to halve. But what we did was, in fact, globally also, we increased also to 1.4 million people. And over 320,000 are, in fact, also pedestrian fatalities. We have air pollution. More than 4 million people, in fact, also are affected directly also through premature deaths through air pollution and transport. We have climate change. Transport is still also, after 2 years of COVID, it's still also now growing again also through massive motorization, not just also in the global south, but also in the global north. We have the highest motorization ever also in Europe. And transport is also the key CO2 emitter. So we're actually failing. And the question on the decade to change, we had already the decade of action also in road safety. And yes, also, all of you have observed also great steps on the ground in front of your doorstep. But we don't have delivered also on the SDGs. We don't have delivered also on really also the systematic change. And here, so that's also what the session is really also about. But also the session is about also looking from a specific lens. Because we heard also from Lake, from Charles, we will hear later also from Angie, also the importance from a gender perspective to really also understand, well, particularly as women are in fact also even also more affected also in air pollution, in road safety, and also in daily life also through harassment. People of color, other ethnic minorities, suffers even more also here. So thinking about also that perspective. And finally, wow, what a start also on the first day also with the young people celebrating also, well, we need also action, and we need action now. And they came with this wonderful list of 90 action items. And I was mostly moved as yesterday from also the star also for me from Walk21 here when she talked about the young girl from Dublin, talked about the challenge she's facing. And I thought about my daughter, and she's 8. And I was recently at a financial advisor, and I asked her where to put her the money for her. And she said, well, is it about her pension? Then we're talking 2080. We will probably not be there by then, or at least at most of us here, but have that in perspective. That is the perspective of our youth, 2080 going into retirement. I hope to be there soon. But that's also to really also say, well, what kind of radical change we also need now, and how also to get there. And that's also the session will be also about to find also the priority action, not the list of 90 or the 150, but really also what are the trigger points we can also hand over when we meet also the minister in the elevator or maybe also in the pub saying, okay, these are the 3 or 5 things also we want from a gender, from an equity, from a safety perspective. You, minister, and all ministers around the world also to deliver. So with that also, I have the honor also to have also 3 excellent speakers from different perspectives also giving us some inputs. And I'd like to ask first Angie Schmitt. She is, I have to put my glasses on now, I even can't my own reading now. So she's a really well-known writer on sustainable transportation in the US. She was a long-term editor of the Streets blog. She has regular commentary on New York Times, Atlantic, NPR, and she's the founder of the new firm 3MPH, which I assume will be miles per hour, and is focusing on pedestrian planning. And she just also published in 2020 a new book, and I'm sure so you will also advertise, and you can find it already on Amazon and buy it. And with that, I would like to introduce you, and we're looking forward to hear more about pedestrian safety. Thank you.
Awesome. Hi. Thanks so much for having me. It's a big honor to be here in Ireland with you guys. It's very disorienting, actually. Europe is really aspirational for us in the U.S. and biking and walking advocacy, and I'm sort of like, where's all the parking lots arriving here? The title of my book is Right of Way, and it's about what I call the pedestrian safety crisis in the U.S. So that's what I'm going to be talking about, explaining what I mean by that, why it's happening, and sort of what we can do about it. So this is pretty narrowly focused on the U.S., but I'll try to sort of frame out and talk about how it fits into a larger global context. But this is what we've seen in the United States over the last decade. All of a sudden, there was we started seeing this enormous shift around 2009. And it's very unusual for us in traffic safety. Since about the 1970s in the US, we've been able to sort of count on traffic deaths declining. You know, that's around the time we started requiring seat belts. So over time, we had seen gradual improvements. All of a sudden, this starts to reverse about 10 years ago. And that was so unusual that at first a lot of people thought it was a fluke or just didn't really know what was going on, but now we know a little more sort of what's causing it. And one point I wanted to make about this is a problem that's actually gotten worse in the last few years. So I thought, you know, when the pandemic came along and a lot of people were telecommuting, you know, total traffic miles were declining, that we'd see an improvement, but actually it got a lot worse during the pandemic. So just to put this in context a little bit, and this is what I was talking about with Europe being a little aspirational for us. Obviously our street conditions were a lot more car-centric in the United States, and a lot of people, especially low-income people in the United States, just really deal with horrible conditions, horrible street conditions, trying to catch the bus, trying to walk. And in the US, this is a problem that's related a lot to inequality. So especially in some of our southern regions of the United States, it may be only sort of the poorest folks, people like, sort of like the underclass that's relying on walking and transit. And so it's hard for us to build the political will to sort of provide even the bare minimum of safe accommodations for those folks. Now, I recently saw a statistic that said 67% of pedestrian deaths in the United States happen on streets where there's no sidewalk even. So a lot of places around the US are lacking very, very basic safety amenities. Let's see. Okay, so this is a problem, pedestrian deaths, and now we're up to almost 7,000 a year in the United States. This is a problem that's a little bit like Corona. I think like a lot of our public health problems that we're starting to better understand is related to inequality we have in our society, including racism. So this is a problem that disproportionately affects Black folks in the United States, Native people, and in some instances we do show Latinos at higher risk as well. I'm going to talk more about that later in the presentation, but pretty much any group that's a little bit marginalized in the United States is at increased risk to be killed while walking. So another group is older folks, and this is a group, A, that we're not doing a very good job planning for in the United States, and B, that's growing very rapidly. So right now, about 1 in 4 people in the US are 65 and older, and over the next few decades, it's supposed to grow to 1 in 3. So as far back as about a decade ago, groups like the CDC predicted that pedestrian deaths would rise just because of the aging of the American population. And like I said, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but also low-income neighborhoods are being passed over for the kind of infrastructure they need to keep themselves safe. Okay, so I come from the city of Cleveland. It's a cold, kind of mid-sized city in the United States. And this is a map that shows racial segregation in Cleveland. We're very segregated, and this is a racial dot map, and what it shows is the green areas show black neighborhoods, the orange areas show neighborhoods that are primarily white, and the yellow shows areas that are a little more diverse. So you can see we're a very segregated neighborhood or city. Now, if we look, this is a corresponding map that shows the most dangerous road segments in the city of Cleveland, and you can see how they line up almost perfectly with neighborhoods of color. So I'm using Cleveland as an example here, but we see that in metro areas throughout the United States, that kind of pattern. So there's a degree of systemic racism in the way we design our streets, and that has an effect on who gets killed. So I'm going to shift gears, and I'm picking on a little bit Portland now, which is a very, in the United States, is one of the leaders in biking and walking. And they've really invested a lot in street safety initiatives and bike infrastructure in Portland. So their Bureau of Transportation, they made this nice map here on the left side. Is that left? This side of the map, and it shows all the people that were killed in a 2-year period, and it uses the first names. They're trying to humanize the victims, which I think is a nice touch. But you can see that the deaths aren't happening in a random pattern. There's this clear concentration over here on this side of the map. So if we look to this next map, it shows, in the circles, it shows the 30 most dangerous intersections in Portland. And for the purposes of this map, the important thing to understand is there's a very important socioeconomic dividing line at East 82nd Street in Portland. So in Portland, everything east of 82nd Street is called East Portland. And East Portland is more diverse and lower income than the rest of the city. So if you look at the map, 28 out of 30 of the most dangerous intersections in Portland are in East Portland. So only about a quarter of Portland lives in East Portland, but they account for 50% of traffic deaths. So people who live in that part of the city are twice as likely to be killed. And again, I'm picking on Portland here, but this is a pattern we see over and over in the United States. Okay, so just to reiterate a little bit, I'm talking more about why this is happening, why we're seeing this escalation in deaths. So A, the American population is getting a little older, so they're a little more vulnerable. B, we also tend to be moving to places that are a little bit more dangerous. And you probably see this a little bit in Europe as well. We have more low-income folks out in suburbs, and we also have more folks in the southeast part of the United States that's most dangerous. But we have this third trend that's really important that I'm going to talk a little bit about now, and that's we've had this big shift in our vehicle mix in the United States. And that's really the thing we can point to most clearly that's causing the problem. So you can see when we're coming out of the last recession, we're selling about an equal number of sedans versus SUVs and pickups. But then we see they really come apart, and now almost 3 in 4 new cars sold is either a pickup or an SUV, and sedans have really sort of gone out of style. You don't see them sold very much. Okay, so that's really the thing we can point to most clearly and say this is what's causing this big escalation in pedestrian deaths. And I'm using myself, I'm about 5'6", so I'm an average to tall woman. I'm using myself sort of for scale here. But you can see if I was struck by the sedan, a Honda Civic, here on this side, it would hit me kind of in the legs, right? Which is not a great thing to happen to you, but if you compare it to this is a Toyota 4Runner, which is much more like the average sort of car in the United States now, I would be struck, in the abdomen or the chest, and that's where people's internal organs are. So it's a much more dangerous place to get struck, and Someone who is shorter or a child, in that case, may be pushed under the wheels when they're struck. So we have really good data in the United States. Going back to 2015, the Federal Highway Administration, they published, it was a review of a bunch of data, and they found that pedestrians struck by SUVs were 2.5 to 3 times more likely than pedestrians struck by sedans to be killed. And for children who are more likely to be hit in the head, it's even worse. So I just want to walk you through sort of the evolution of one car. This is the RAV4, which is the #1 selling car in the United States outside of pickups. And this is what it looked like back in the 90s. It was very cute and little. This is just a tall version of a sort of sedan they sell, and it starts out at about 2,500 pounds. So if we go forward, this is a few years ago. Again, this is the #1 selling car in the US. The style now is that they have a very mean-looking sort of front end that kind of scowls on you, and that really tall grille, okay? So it's almost 1,000 pounds heavier at the light end. So pedestrians, when they are struck, are being struck by heavier cars higher on the body. So I got a lot of mileage out of this photo. This is my son when he was 4 years old, standing in front of it's a lifted Ford F-250. So you can see not only size is a problem, but also visibility. In some cases, so this is, by the way, the Ford F-Series is the #1 selling vehicle in the United States every year, and has been for a decade. So this is on the larger end of those, but the top selling pickup trucks in the United States now are 55 inches on the grill on average. So there's a group called kidsandcars.org that did a really interesting experiment where they tried to see how many children could fit in the blind zone of some of the best-selling cars in the United States. And this is this one is an SUV they're using, but some of them have as large as 15-foot forward blind zones. And they were able to fit more than a dozen children sitting before they were visible to the average driver seated in a normal position. Okay, in addition, cars are getting a lot more powerful. So I think urban planners were working a lot on how to do traffic calming and slow people down, especially on residential streets. Well, this just makes it harder. They call this the horsepower arms race in the auto industry. So cars can accelerate and go faster. And when someone's driving a very powerful car with 400 horsepower, it's more difficult to get them to slow down, basically. And I just want to quickly touch on that. It's also very bad for the climate. This has eaten up a lot of the energy savings we should have experienced. Okay, so real quickly, I'm sort of wrapping up, but one thing I wanted to talk about was, I'm going to skip this one. Okay, sorry. So I want to talk a little bit, just looking forward. In the United States, we just passed a big infrastructure bill that is going to expand funding for infrastructure a lot, and I think it's sort of a middle-of-the-road piece of legislation. It isn't the kind of thing that advocates were really hoping for that would change everything in the United States. I would love to see them do, interstate highway system type of project to complete sidewalks. But that's not what we're doing. You can see what the money is going towards, and safety and research is, you can see, a small percentage. But we did win. There are some wins in that, especially with some of the issues I mentioned about cars. For the first time ever, they're going to be rating vehicles in the United States on a 5-star scale for impacts to pedestrians and cyclists. So throughout our entire history with vehicle regulation, we've never had a single regulation designed to protect pedestrians in the United States. So this bill will change that for the first time. Certain things like automatic pedestrian detection, automatic emergency braking are going to become required. And I'm actually a little bit optimistic about that kind of thing. That can start to make a dent. And you guys in Europe are ahead of us on that. So there are some exciting changes, but we still have a lot of work cut out for us. And just in my last minute or so, to sort of frame this a little bit globally, because I know I talked a lot about cars. One thing that's very concerning to me about what we're seeing, this escalation in these really dangerous and aggressive vehicles, is that eventually these vehicles are going to be inherited by developing countries is the pattern in the United States. After 11 years, they end up in Mexico or different countries in the global south, so where they could produce a lot of fatalities. So that's just something to look out for. I know this is happening a little bit in Europe. I've seen some SUVs around here too. So it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity because, again, with regulation, we can have a big impact. So I'm going to pass it off to the next speaker here, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Angie. That was really impressive, and hopefully also we will have more timers on the panel to discuss and what to do about that and how we also bring us into regulations and other action. So the next speaker is where's she there? Okay, Heather Allen. Heather is a really well-known international expert in urban transport, in climate change, in gender. She had worked particularly in emerging economies, recently did a lot of work also on gender and the impact also of COVID, as well as currently also doing work in Kenya, in Malawi, in Nigeria. And I know Heather for a long time, so she's also very active also on the global stage related to the SDGs, to climate change. So, but today we will hear more from her, particularly from a gender and public space perspective. And so, Heather, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Holger. Yes, we have worked a lot in the past and happy to be continuing on that. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be a little provoking, to have a little provocation, as it were, to get us going and thinking about for the World Café. I was asked to talk about gender and public space and also to make that reference to the SDGs. Yes, that word, a decade of action, always fills me with a little bit of trepidation, mainly because we had that decade of action of road safety, and it immediately didn't actually deliver. It's like winning a prize for a kind of very clever startup, and 3 years later it's dissolved because it doesn't work. So, we don't necessarily want to put these titles and these tags on it, but from a political perspective, they really do help, and they do help generate the interest and get people to put money in the right places and places that they might not have thought about putting it before. So in those terms, I think the SDGs are incredibly important. We have to deliver on them. And when you're thinking about gender and the SDGs, there are actually quite a number of them that make reference to gender. Inequality and equity, there's one. There's equal access to education, obviously decent work. And I think the one that refers back to the public space issue is SDG 11 and livable cities. So that's the one I'm going to kind of focus mainly on today. So I thought it was worthwhile also to just make sure that we had a common understanding about this word gender, because it's thrown around all over the place quite often, and not everybody actually understands what it is. Gender is actually the social construct of our societies around the roles and expectations of what men and women do. It is not a word that is totally interchangeable with women. So that is actually something that we need to think a little bit about when we use this word. It doesn't matter very much at the moment because all action in that area is good. But actually we need to make sure that we understand that deep down. So really gender defines those roles, and they can be taken on by men or by women. And as societies change, and in different parts of the world, that balance differs. So it's not about the separation, it's more about the unity. And again, that I think is one of the key aspects of gender that we really also need to embrace. And it is often interchanged with women as a notion, as a group of people. When you make a gender action, it's to do with helping empower women in some way. But that at the moment is mainly because women all over the world, and although this is changing in the north a little bit, they do take on the majority of the caring roles. So that means that you have this triple burden, if you like. You need to be productive in terms of economically productive. You need to be reproductive in terms of the family. And then you also need to have this caring role, looking after the family at the different generations, younger and older. So it can be a little bit of it's a heavy burden. In time, in travel, in transport, in the mobility, in access, in education, and that leads us back to all those different SDGs which are really important. Yes, public space is used quite differently by women than men, if I can use it in that term, just for the ease of being simplistic, as it were. Here you can see it's a very typical, picture. I took it in Latin America, a mother with 2 children. Look at the space that she needs. If you have the sidewalk, which is a narrow sidewalk, she can't walk easily with those children. So it's a very clear example that the standards we use in transport engineering usually don't actually take into account the gendered needs, the women's needs of how they move around and use in public space. So public space is used for transport. Walking is a transport mode. I did a study with the Volvo Research and Education Foundation, and I found that one of the key things that came through on a small international study was that people don't recognize that walking is a transport mode. So walking is a transport mode, and we use public space to transport ourselves by walking. So that's important, but it is not yet gender sensitive. So we do need to make some changes in that. It's also a space that's used for stopping and staring and crossing roads and thinking about what we might be doing. It's more than just walking. I think Jan Gehl said there's more to walking than just walking. So why do we need to really think that we need to put more vision and investment into the gendered side of the public space infrastructure that we have? Of course, walking is a destination. The destination may be shopping. This lady has obviously been shopping. She has, a lot to carry. It's not easy for women to negotiate the public space. There's no dropped curbs here, you can see. It would be the same for a disabled person or somebody that might be partially disabled or temporarily disabled. So we need to make sure that our public space is actually really accessible to everyone. And yes, gender is a good point of contact with that. If you take a stroller and a shopping bag around your city, you will see very quickly just how accessible it is. And that would mean accessibility for the elderly, accessibility for young people, accessibility for people with disabilities and might be mobility challenged. So actually using women or gender as a point of reference, and it is a point of reference, gives you a very good insight into what you could do, in fact. Okay, so public space is also an area that you would use for thinking and looking and watching. Most of my pictures come from public transport because that's the area that I work mainly on. I've done a lot of work with some of you in the room, including Lake, on particularly sexual harassment in public space and on public transport all over the world. And this space can be perceived as being very dangerous by women. And it's very complicated because it changes at different times of the day, and it changes with the different life stages that you may be within your life. So this lady on the left here may feel quite comfortable and confident about using that public space at any time of the day or night, whereas the lady who's up against the bus stop with the guy who's kind of looking in her direction, not sure about that, might feel, oh, I would only use it in the morning or when it's the daylight is there, not at night, because I don't feel comfortable. And again, an adolescent girl would have, again, a different feeling about it. So it's not just about the infrastructure, it's about the emotion of that public space, the kind of feelings that people have. And feelings are always really difficult to put into statistics, let's face it. That's not easy. They don't fit into our models, do they? But we need to recognize that different people and different genders use public space in a different way. And the knowledge and the evidence base that we have at the moment is rather poor on that. Again, if we're going to deliver on the SDGs, the data on disaggregated, gendered information, particularly from the transport sector, is, how do I want to say it, appalling, inconsistent, incomparable. You cannot compare one set with another, illogical sometimes. It's not good enough. So the evidence base we are using is what we think women want. But we need to bother to actually ask them, is this really what they want? There's been some work done, particularly in the Northern Europe countries, where they've had groups of women look at public space and the design of public space. And the designers, the planners, felt that the benches round the edge of the playground was how it should be. That's the best way to put the benches. But when there was a focus group on women, and young women in particular, they said, no, put them closer together, because otherwise I don't want to sit and talk like that and look at my kid over there. I can't have a conversation. You need to change the orientation of those benches so that I can have a conversation, but also keep an eye on my child that's playing in the sandpit over there. No one had ever really thought about that. It is beginning to change, thank goodness. But these are the sorts of things that make very small differences, but very big impacts. And we need to also recognize that many cities and most public space within the city has been designed by men. It is also, unfortunately, recognizing the achievements of men. So cities name their streets very often after men. They put statues up, which are men. They need to actually change that perspective a little bit and make some reference points so that women feel that that city and the whole environment, the public space, is also for them, and they have some reference points in that. We always say behind every man is a great woman, of course. It goes without saying. But many of you might not know that actually Clementine Churchill, the wife of Winston Churchill, and Eleanor Roosevelt were actually two people that were heavily involved in the development of the Declaration of Human Rights and the creation of the United Nations. We don't think about them. We don't see, Eleanor Roosevelt Square very often, or Clementine Churchill Street, but we make that reference to how great Winston Churchill was in the Second World War. He might not have been so great if Clemmy hadn't been behind him, in fact. So I think we need to just recognize that there is some change in this. This is not all negative. So I really think that it can go faster, it can be accelerated. I did want to be a provocation on that. And then bringing down to personal security. All women are not the same, of course. They don't use space in the same way. And men and women, we're different. That's the beauty of the world, isn't it? In the work that I've done, one of the key findings that I found, particularly in the work in Africa, was that we would do surveys about how safe do you feel? Have you ever been sexually harassed? Or, have you had an incident of some kind? And we get information back, but I'd look at the analysis and there's something in here, it's not hanging together. And what it was we found that people had different perceptions of what sexual harassment actually was, within a city and within countries. So sexual harassment as a concept would mean one thing in one place and another thing in another. So we developed this set of pictograms to make sure that in our surveys, everybody understood really what we were talking about. Because you would say, well, staring is sexual harassment. Some people would say, that's not sexual harassment, that happens all the time. Men do that all the time, that's not sexual harassment. But if you actually see it in the right context, and they say, oh, actually, now you've explained it to me, yeah, okay, I can understand. I now understand what you're trying to say. Men and women, not just women. So, just looking at public space, we need to make it more gender sensitive. We need to make it inclusive for everybody. There is a big knowledge gap. There is a big data gap as well. And let's face it, public space really transforms relationships. And it is about relationships and people and coming together. We've noticed this since COVID, that we really need to actually have that human context and contact. And public space is a big part of that. If you make public space inclusive, then you will get social cohesion in a much more accelerated way. And that's really what we need to do. So we need to also look at walking as an asset to livable cities and bring in the gender perspective. And I look forward very much to hearing what the World Café discussions will bring. So, as I say, women use public space quite differently. They use these bus stops as a meeting place. And, behind the mist, there may be a rainbow. And I think that looking at gender is part of that rainbow, because we will become more inclusive just by taking that perspective of making sure that women's voices are more represented and that we have a better evidence base to base our political decisions on it. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather, and we're really looking forward to the discussioners in the World Café to really find a way of how we actually get far closer and far quicker to this rainbow. So with the last speaker now, we are moving to Professor Adrian Davis. Adrian is an international standing and is well known as an interdisciplinary expert on road transport and health. And when I talked to him, he said he's working for far too long also in that field, but I was told it's over 30 years. And he really has worked on the link between health and urban planning, and worked in consultancy as well as research. He's a professor for transport and health at the Transport Research Institute at Edinburgh Napier University, as well as a senior fellow at the University of West England, and describes himself as a boundary spanner between research and practice. So we're looking forward to learn more about your work. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really glad, Olga, that you managed to get that bit in about 2 universities, because for my Scottish friends, if we just put up the University of the West of England, they'll go, surely there's a guy with a spitting image that's up there in Edinburgh. So I do try to work in 2 locations. So I can remove the little sticky note. There we go. So what I'm going to do now is talk about a project about perceptions of safety among pedestrians and cyclists. I'll try not to mention cyclists too much to upset you. Actually, that doesn't matter. Actually, it's similar sorts of results. And what kind of annoys me about this piece of work is that 30 years ago, I wrote a paper in a journal about perceptions of livability for pedestrians and cyclists, and I thought someone more intelligent and brighter than me is going to come along and do the research. And 30 years later, I look around, and as far as I could see, no one had done the research. So unfortunately, I felt I needed to do the research. And I'd like to hear, of course, from people that say, well, actually, we did do it in Bogota or wherever we did it. I just didn't find it. I hope that's the case, but I'm a bit uncertain about that. So here, what would we do in universities? We do the standard thing. We undertake a literature review, and then we write the final project for the funder. I'm just going to walk you through some of this. I may not get to the end of my slides, but the key thing is to talk about some of these issues that stand out so clearly when we talk about gender, we talk about transport violence, and we talk about inequalities, which clearly is a running theme through the conference. So, how do we measure safety? This is such an old agenda item for an oldie like me. We've been talking about it for a very long time. Do we measure safety by the per million, billion miles by road users? How does that work out for people that actually walk a lot but don't really do that many miles? There are lots of different problems which come from the different assessments that we've tried to use in measuring safety. And I'm going to come to one of the really thorny questions in a bit, which is, what is road safety? Actually, road safety is often the unsafety of the transport system, which was what researchers conclude when we look at what's going on, and the terrible stats that were shown from the United States, which are replicated across the world when we think about the pedestrian environment and how many pedestrians are killed who pose virtually no threat to any other road user. So you'll see this sort of graph. Now I'm told if I walk away from the microphone, because I'm a bit peripatetic, so I wander off and you can't hear me, so I better go back. But these are the types of words we tend to find in the literature. We talk about risk, we talk about exposure, safety, danger reduction, and perceptions. And clearly perceptions are very, very important, because as a parent, this is an obvious one, as a parent you look at the world around you, you say, is it safe for my children to walk to school? You look around, of course, and subconsciously or consciously, you look around at your neighbours, because you do what your neighbours do. We are birds of a feather that flock together. We tend to do the socially normative things. If other people don't walk their children to school, it's far less likely that we will do so. But you also make these subjective judgments, which may be right or wrong when we think about objectivity, but they're there, and they may determine that you actually take your child to school in a car, which is, of course, what has increasingly happened for those who can afford cars, and then it accelerates the health inequalities and the overall inequalities we have in society, which is an amplification, and that happens across social class, it happens by gender, and all these things that we need to tackle. So we have to go back, ideally, to the root cause of some of these issues. But these are the types of words we tend to find in the literature. Oops. And then we come to this one, which I think is an interesting one, and now I'm going to get some audience participation, although, as other speakers have said, I can't see you really in the audience. So this is a model of the evolution of safety, so I'm going to dare to wander away from the speaker. Pathological. Who cares as long as we're not caught? So you go up to the top, and maybe that's the best one. Maybe there's better still, hopefully. Generative safety is how we do business around here. So just thinking about where you live, how many of you, if you can show me hands, think you're at the top with your municipal authority, not your national authority? How many of you think you're at that level? Can you raise your hands? I'm not going to go down all the steps because it will get boring, but I think the problem is that I think we are actually still often at the reactive level, that we react because we say it's important, but power and politics determine what really happens. And I'm not going to take any signal that the minister walked out just before I got up to speak. But politics and power and the social political is actually critical to everything, because it is power brokers that determine that the rich travel most and they run the poorer people over most. And that's what goes on in society in all walks of life, not just in transport planning. So, in a literature review, in a boring old literature review, I tried to cut through what I called the mess. How do we approach defining what is safe for vulnerable road users? There's a little three-letter acronym. How do we attempt to measure exposure to risk? Let's think about casualty reduction versus road danger reduction. I'm wandering away from the microphone again. Because as has been said at the outset of this session, one of the things we've found in the decade of road safety is we failed. Number one point, we failed. And one of the problems, I think, is the root cause of this. If we just go for casualty reduction, do we all just get into those big American tanks that we just saw earlier on, where the child looks absolutely tiny, and then we just end up with more people having whiplash injuries, or whatever we have? You know, for the people who can afford those giant, disgusting vehicles that are out there. Or do we actually do what we do in factories, in railway engineering, in catering? We design safety into the system so that the caterer doesn't allow salmonella to be in the system, because you design it. The worker in the factory cannot be injured by the machinery that he or she is using, because we've used health and safety executive rules. But on the road, we don't apply that. So we don't tackle danger at source. So one of the conclusions, which is not my conclusion, is a conclusion that someone also with the name Davis wrote about in the UK back in the 90s. We need to tackle road danger at source. We've got to stop filibustering, playing around with numbers in terms of how many people we might kill on the road. But we really need to go upstream, to use the public health analogy, and say, why is this happening in the first place? It's because of kinetic energy in the system. And that's probably where we really need to go. So I'm jumping ahead of myself, but we need to think about perceived safety, as I referred to it. If people perceive the environment is unsafe, then they're not going to walk. What informs perception of risk and danger? We need to obviously understand those. And then we need to change the traffic safety culture, because the traffic safety culture at the moment is pretty rotten in the way that it's structured to perpetuate the system that allows people to be killed on the road in such large numbers. So, skipping ahead to quite a lot of conclusions, I've tried to highlight a few of them. So I proposed a number of questions. What's the most effective approach to defining what is safe for vulnerable road users? Well, the answer in short is we have to move to a road danger reduction system. We have to tackle that danger at source. And as we've seen as part of Safe Systems Road Safety, which I haven't used that phrase before yet, but it's there and we talked about it in the conference, we need to pick up that beautiful idea that the Swedes started off with in 96-97 of Vision Zero, move it forward and actually activate it, because a lot of places around the world we're talking about the rhetoric of safe systems, but we're not implementing it. And what is key to that, not the only thing, but a key to that is reducing vehicle speeds. We have to, as the Stockholm Declaration said recently, just 2 years ago, whenever there are any people around, nothing more than 30 kph, 20 miles an hour. And that, in the environment where I live and work in Scotland and in England, that's what increasingly we're trying to do. It's not the only thing, it's not a magic bullet, but we must reduce danger at source by reducing kinetic energy on the road. We'll try somehow to deal with the size of the damn vehicles as another task, but we have to reduce the kinetic energy by the speeds that people are able to travel. And, of course, if we do that successfully, then we have a chance of getting people to change their mode. We won't do it on just with that alone, probably. So, moving down, casualty reduction or danger reduction, yes, we've got to tackle the source. And then, what informs perceived safety? Well, we know from the literature, time and again, for those of us in research, we know that speed, motorised traffic volume, and lack of segregation mitigates against perception of being safe. So what we have to do is make sure, certainly above 30 kph, that we segregate and we make space safe for, particularly for cyclists who otherwise will have no segregation from being very close to motor vehicles, but also make it safer for pedestrians. And that pedestrian aspect really includes a lot more focus on how we make it safer for pedestrians to cross streets. And some of that we're starting to see now with some of the side street pedestrian crossings that are being started to be implemented in the UK, where the pedestrian has a right immediately when you come to a side road junction to cross, and there will be some infrastructure there to help make that happen. So there are lots of things I won't go into the detail of, but these reports are on the Road Safety Trust website in the UK. We need to deal with about perceptions of danger or risk and how we deal with those. We need to deal with changing traffic safety culture. And that safety culture I'm referring to is what I showed you on a previous slide about where we think we are. Are we just purely responsive to the challenges that are coming, or are we actually proactively right up there at a generative level saying, actually, this is the way we do business, and our business is, yes, it's no fatalities, but we're going to actually implement the measures. We're going to retrain our staff, that's another topic in itself, retrain the staff the way they think about it and how they get engaged with the communities that they're responsible for, so they actually hear, and for example, a very good example, hear from women about how you design streets that are safe at bus stops, safe elsewhere, because if you try to do research around road safety, you will find, particularly with women, that, and not just women, but particularly with women, you'll find road safety just blurs into personal safety. You know, it's hard to disaggregate the two. So I did a convenience survey sample. I don't really want to talk about that very much, other than just to point out where this is leading to. Convenience surveys are nothing more than what they say on the tin. They were for people that I could actually access. They turned out to be Sustrans volunteers living in Scotland. Sustrans is an advocacy group which actually builds and designs walk and cycle infrastructure across the UK. And we found that in the survey findings there was really critical importance about safe crossing facilities. These are blindingly obvious. They've been in the literature for a long time. Feelings of safety. Clearly there was a very clear gender divide, as has the literature said time and again, to need to think about safety for women. Far less women are interested or feeling safe about going out after dark, and the conditions that need to be changed for women to make them feel safe. It not only included reducing traffic speeds. There's a lot more there. The critical thing about the research that I'm putting up on the screen is, unfortunately, what I was trying to do was to devise a tool for practitioners that would be quick and simple to do with not many questions, because if you ask lots of questions, you get survey fatigue amongst people potentially filling in the survey, and you lose them, and you get less data as a result, or less reliable data because the numbers are too small. So I was trying to do something I think which was fairly impossible, and I've now been told by people more qualified than I that I need to make the survey longer, more detailed, and so the next stage of the research is to do a randomised, to do a representative sample survey across a much larger cohort of the population, probably in Scotland, to move to a situation, hopefully, that will have a tool that actually measures, because it asks road users who are pedestrians and cyclists, or I mentioned cyclists, but pedestrians, it will ask them about their perceptions of safety in different situations around their neighbourhood. We do not have that tool as far as I'm aware at the moment, and I think 30 years is too long to wait in my lifetime for that tool to be developed. So I will continue to work on that so we actually have something we can share globally that may be useful in other situations other than the global north, that help local municipal highway authorities and local residents to have a safer environment in which to walk. So I think on that, I say thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. And if we could get us to the last slide deck on. So after we heard all these inspiring speeches around gender, around safety, elements of equity, now it's your time. So you are the experts, you have the expertise. And to frame that, I don't know if I have to press a button to... So the World Café slide, if you could put them up, brilliant. So this is really about also the core questions, the big questions. How can we make walking safer, more secure and sustainable to deliver the SDG commitments by 2030? So we know so there's a lot of details, but we want to get also the big picture. So we want to have also your thoughts and ideas. And that's also how we're going to do that. It's actually, by the way, a huge experiment. So like usually as a World Café you do in a group of 30, 40 people. Now we're doing it with 200. So let's also try also that out. When I talk to Bronwyn, it's like, okay, yeah, that's a challenge. So we will have 3 rooms with 3 topics. So we will focus all on the national action, particularly, so on also how to deliver on the SDG. And we will have safety. I have no clue where these rooms are, but I'm sure that there are many people also who can also guide you also to that. So we have safety, we have equity, and we have gender. And we have 3 people also who will then also bring all the information also together. Thanks also to Richard, Jason, and Jess also for doing that. We will see them later also on stage. So the way it will work, we will have 2 rounds by each of 20 minutes. We will have about 10 tables in each of the rooms. With us a facilitator, and he or she will then also stay at the table to bring us things together. So first round is also brainstorming. So 15 minutes about the ideas, key actions to list. We also have flip charts to make that interactive and consider the national level momentum for that action. And then also the group will prioritize that, and then you will move just to another table. So just mix. There's a little bit of chaos involved. So just so to see where is another table and a person as you like. And can I just finish, sir? And then also you might also have a final say. And the second round also we will also have the reviewing. So the facilitator will also come up also with some of the findings of the first group, and then also will be select. So we will not have more than 5 key messages also from each table. And you see here so all the great volunteers. Bronwyn did a great job also bringing everyone also together. And those are your facilitators also in the room. So if you notice also your name there, please also go to that room and find also the appropriate table. And then also we will have a report card with 3 to 5 priorities, and please give that also back also to also like your key room rapporteur, as we showed also before. Okay. We leave that also on there so that everyone also knows where we're going. So we're learning. Is the gentleman still wanted to? Was there? Okay, so that's fine. We do that later. All right. I hope I confused you enough also to just get going. Again, also let's make that also about also actions, and we will after this just one final important thing also to say. I have to catch a flight also later on, so we have to be all back also by 1:45 here after lunch. So please also come on time so that we can also go to the final session. Thank you very much. See you later.